Father Gregory Boyle, welcome back to the show.
It's great to be here, Dan.
It's always a pleasure to talk to you. Congratulations on your new-ish book. And as I understand it, you wrote the book because you wanted to address these divisive times. And sad to say, things have become even more divisive since you wrote the book. So I'd be interested in sort of like your emotional color around the book and its subjects as you and I could sit down to do this interview.
Well, it was released on Election Day. And since then, I think we have this notion that what is divided is that we have people who hold certain views and other people who hold other views. And I'm more inclined at the moment to think that we all are held not by views, but by kind of an anguish that we share to varying degrees. And so how do we soothe that anguish? How do we choose community? And how do we walk each other home to something that might resemble wholeness and health and well-being? But we do think it's about winning the argument, and that somehow our division is about the views we hold. But I think if we get underneath things, then we see that it's really kind of indicative of something else, and that's something that needs, a dose of tenderness and gentleness and extraordinary kinds of kindness to, help people ease this anguish that's really so pervasive that everybody shares, even if it comes from different places. But it's not about the price of eggs. It's about, a shared anguish that actually joins us together rather than separates us.
Do you think that anguish is perpetual in the human animal, or that there's something unique and acute about the anguish now in our culture?
Vivek Murthy, who was the Surgeon General under Biden and Obama, he said that, and has written a final document of his term as Surgeon General that I recommend. But he says that mental health is the defining health issue of our time, and I think that's significant. So if you look at, a 300% increase in hate crimes, I don't know how else you explain that except to say that mental health is the defining health issue of our time. Or, adolescents who are hypnotized by their cell phones or locked in their rooms staring at a computer, or the rise in suicides, or fentanyl use and overdoses. In the last 5 years, I've done more funerals from gang members who have died of fentanyl overdoses than from gang violence. And the list is quite long. 90 million people who could vote didn't. And that's just extraordinary. And that has nothing to do with disaffection with politicians. That's a kind of a lethargy that indicates, again, that mental health is the defining health issue of our time. Even, the other day on the weekend, when Governor Shapiro's house was firebombed and they have the perpetrator in custody, but they're talking about, well, they're not certain if the motivation was religious or political. I go, gosh, I was going to go with mental health, because nobody healthy, well, or whole has ever done such a thing in the history of the world. So it's very confusing to me that people would say, gosh, I wonder what the motivation was. Like there would be a rational motivation that would lead somebody to do such a thing. So, and all we do is we kind of shake our fists and we say, this is unacceptable. I go, well, of course it's unacceptable. But what does it mean? It's not just the volume has been turned up and people are, somehow led to do such acts of violence because of the rhetoric and the level and the velocity of it. But it's another indicator that we're not whole, we're not well. And so how do we get there? because we don't get there by just shaking our fists at it and saying, isn't this awful? And this shouldn't happen. It's not okay. Well, nobody healthy thinks it's okay.
Well, let me just pick up on that last thing you said. Nobody healthy thinks it's okay. By it, I assume you mean sort of our political culture right now, or are you saying
that act of violence? But
that
yes,
act of violence?
Yeah,
both.
Yeah, I mean, again, I will be your retribution is the quote. But then you stop and you go, well, retribution is not the endeavor of a healthy adult, period. Not ever. It just isn't. And then I heard Newt Gingrich say the other day, but wanting payback is human, and it may well be human, but you couldn't make the case that it's healthy. And so the goal is how do we help each other become healthier tomorrow than we are today? We all could use that. That's the point of community. That's how people flourish. And in a community where they are cherished, they will start to move in the direction of wholeness and wellness. But it's not a moral quest, because the moral quest has never kept us moral. It's just kept us from each other. It's kept us from seeing that we could really choose to soothe and to be a calming, peaceful, kind presence to each other.
All right, there's so many places to take this discussion. Let me start here. The first chapter is called "The Wild One," and it really a core concept of your book, and a core concept of like how those among us who are healthy should handle the current situation is really wrapped up in your vision of what God is, or who God is. And you come back to this phrase, the wild one. And I'd be interested to hear you explain what that means. And also just to address, because I think a preponderance, if not 90% of this audience is interested in spirituality, personal growth, but might be wary of the G word.
Yeah, well, the wild one refers to Meister Eckhart, who was a theologian and a mystic of many years ago, who was trying to kind of break the notion of the partial God that we've all settled for, the one that created in our own image leads us to be exacting and judgmental and puny. And so he's trying to, he'll say things like, it is a lie, any talk of God that doesn't comfort you. So he was way ahead of his times in terms of trying to locate a more spacious, expansive notion. And so people may or may not buy the notion of God. I dedicated one chapter so that I could somehow address a larger notion of it. So St. Ignatius of Loyola, the founder of the Jesuits, would say, always talk about the God who's always greater. So just when you think you've landed on some notion of who God is, we're led into this other more spacious place where it's always greater than our tiny, puny view. So to the extent, I mean, even in 12-step recovery, where people talk about higher powers, in any case, the hope is that your higher power or whatever notion you have gets larger and larger as you grow. And so that none of us want to settle for a partial notion that is that limits our ability to delight in each other and to breathe in the spirit that delights in our being, and then to breathe it out into the world, because the world could sure use it, especially now.
We talked about this last time you were on the show, but I think it's worth kind of covering a little bit of the same ground. Would it be for, and I'll speak for myself as somebody who is a sort of open-minded agnostic, but not, I don't use the word God much, if ever. What would be another word that that would rhyme with what you're saying, that so that we can have this conversation on verbal grounds, we can grammatical, linguistic grounds that we can both agree on. Would it be the universe, the mystery, or does it really have to be God?
Well, I think what sustains you. So wherever you find your center, and where you find yourself grounded, however you talk about that, the sustaining spirit, the ground of being, and anything. And again, I mean, I don't do any kind of God that, has a white beard and is male. But, I always say God protects me from nothing, but sustains me in everything. So it's the sustaining part that's kind of essential. And so whatever you return to is the sustaining spirit and the core of your being. By returning it, and I always appreciate in you your sense of practice, that you return in your practice to the ground so you can be freshly grounded, so you can be every day return to the core that sustains you, that allows you to receive people and allows your heart to be altered by people. Otherwise, you're full speed ahead and you've lost your grounding. So whatever, sometimes for me, just because I'm a Jesuit priest and I'm Catholic, I'm okay with saying God. It's shorthand. It's shorthand for, I think, what we all hope for, which is the core of our being, the thing that you return to in your practice as a touchstone that allows you to have this intentionality in your life where you can say, I'm about to receive somebody in my presence, and I'm going to allow this person to reach me, and I'm going to listen, and I'm going to love. Whatever allows you to live from that place is your God, is your higher power, is your sustaining spirit. So whatever language, and we're kind of limited probably by how we articulate this anyway, but that's kind of where I am on it.
I mean, that's a version of God that I can get behind. And as I was listening to you speak about what sustains you, I was, of course, and I'm sure everybody listening was trying to figure out for themselves. I was trying to figure out for myself what's my answer to that question. And I think it's probably a Buddhist answer of wisdom and compassion being the two sides of the same coin. Wisdom seeing the truth of non-separation and interdependence, and compassion arising out of that inexorably. You can also go from the other direction. But I think when I'm in that mode, I'm sustained, I'm open, I'm resourced, I'm not an asshole. And when I'm out of it, who knows?
And it's with every breath you take. It's not kind of once and for all. It's not even, I handled this in the morning and now I'm good to go. It's a way to touch it all the time.
Yes.
So that you can be beneficially present to the world and to the people who, especially here, I'm in my office and every seat is filled out there in the waiting area. People come in and everybody's hair is on fire and everybody's stressed out. And so how can you, be thoroughly anchored enough to be able to be present and delight and hold the mirror up and remind people of the truth of who they are, and it's hard. I think it's exceedingly hard to do, no matter how, faithful you are to a practice that keeps you anchored. It's still hard because you're, homies here, they always talk about, don't let yourself be taken to that place. And everybody here knows what it means, where somebody pushes and you push back, as opposed to leaning in and being more curious about people's reactions to things rather than take things personally. So, it's a challenge. It's a good challenge. It's how we all want to. I was saying this morning, that we have to choose to soothe, and that half of our family here, there are 800 of us. Half of us on one day have their hair on fire, but the next day, the rest of us will have our hair on fire. So how do we choose to be a soothing presence to people who are carrying more burdens than they can carry, and often whose dignity has been denied, and people who are really struggling? So I was reading a poem by Denise Levertov where she talks about, that instead of the phrase, they're driving me crazy, she's talking about community drives us sane. And that's why that's important for us to be located in a place where everybody is supplying a dose of tenderness and kindness, driving us all sane, which is to say, in Spanish, sane, sanar means to heal. It's about health. It's not about reminding people of what is wrong or right, Again, Governor Shapiro, when he was talking about this horrific thing that happened, he was again, it's his home, it's his family, I get it. But saying, this is not okay. Well, yes, it's not. Of course it's not okay. But how do we understand when members of our human family act out in this way? It's people are in pain. Find the thorn underneath. The homies always say that here. Find the thorn underneath. And because you want to be able to understand that this is coming from a place not of legitimate, rational, political, or religious perspective. It's coming from real wound, real brokenness. And how do we help each other heal? And how do we form communities where we can drive each other sane? And that's kind of essential. I think it's the only answer to the truth that mental health is the defining health issue of our time. If that's true, it's not about, good and evil. It's about well and not so well. And that, for me, that softens it. So nobody needs to be a villain, and nor is it necessary to demonize or scapegoat. Let's just help each other, and knowing that love never fails. That's where our confidence is rooted, I think.
Love never fails. I can imagine people listening to this thinking, well, I tried turning the other cheek a few times and I got my ass kicked. Or, some people, you can't, some people are beyond my capacity to love. That's a sucker's game you're playing, Father Boyle.
Well, I mean, obviously I don't think so, because I really think on some level you can look back and you go, when did love ever fail? Because if it's about results or evidence-based outcomes or I don't know what, or success, but that's not how you measure. When it comes to love, it's discovering truly that loving is your home, and then you discover that you're never homesick, and that's where the joy is. It's not about results. It's just a force that is so sustaining, and that in the end, it will always conquer. It's just we need to have more of it, and healthy people are loving people, and healthy people are holy people, and healthy people are inclusive and nonviolent, and have unconditional loving kindness, and are compassionately accepting. And that's what a healthy person looks like. I read an obituary yesterday. I didn't know the woman. It was in the LA Times. And it said her overriding characteristic was that she had a moral compass. And then I thought about that. I go, well, any healthy person has a moral compass. It's not about a good person or a bad person. Since we're all unshakably good, it's just a matter of, do we know this or do we not know this? And we belong to each other. But every healthy person is a holy person who has a moral compass. I don't think our current president has a moral compass, but that's not because he's bad. It's because he's quite ill. And so I don't need to demonize him. I have huge compassion because nobody chooses to be that ill. I think illness, however we explain it, can choose, but we don't choose illness. It happens. And because that's the part of our human family, then how do we help people, walk home to wholeness? So then there's no moral overlay. There's no, you can certainly say it's not okay to throw a Molotov cocktail into the governor's house. That goes without saying. But you want to kind of get underneath it. You want to understand, where's this coming from, so that we can be helpful to people who are inclined to throw a Molotov cocktail. That's why, for 40 years I've worked with gang members, and you've had a lot of politicians and a lot of law enforcement people who are tough on crime. And I always knew that if you said you were tough on crime, it just meant that you weren't serious about actually reducing it, because there was no desire to get underneath and understand what this is about so that you could address, root causes, I suppose. But so we kind of cut to the chase. We name things incorrectly, and our diagnoses are, really quite skewed and off, and because we're kind of mired in this sense of what's right and wrong, and it's why we don't make progress. And I'd love to make progress, and I think love never fails, in as much as that always makes progress, always, whether people can perceive it or not. It's always making progress. And the more you can remind people of their true selves in loving, the closer you get to actually advancing, where there is peace and there's justice and people tolerate and love each other.
Just to put a fine point on the love never fails, and my playing devil's advocate, maybe that's a loaded phrase in this context, and saying you're playing a sucker's game, that some skeptics or cynics might say that. I want to be clear. You have a little phrase that I like a lot, and you've kind of hinted at it in this conversation up until now. And it's this, that you can resist without demonizing. Now I'm going to use my own language, and you may or may not agree with this, but in my view, you can take quite strenuous action from a place of love, caring, compassion. In fact, you could probably do many of the same things you would do from the standpoint of anger or hatred, but it has a very different quality if it's motivated by caring and loving. It's for the doer. It's a much cleaner burning fuel. It's much less likely to burn you out. And I think it's much more likely to contribute to successful, caring action. Okay, I said a lot of words there. Agree or disagree?
Well, I think, how do you kind of measure, your response to things? To the extent that you demonize or make somebody a villain, then you're on the wrong track. It doesn't mean that you're any less clear about actions that are unjust and not respectful of due process and all the things that we're going through right now. But the us against them, it just creates the division. Whereas you and I would both agree that, separation is an illusion. And so how do we remind ourselves that there is no us and them, there's just us? And if you can cling to that, and especially to the notions that everybody's unshakably good and we all belong to each other, then we can, once you dispel of that notion that there's kind of that separation is bound to happen, then you can roll up your sleeves. And so cherishing love is love with its sleeves rolled up. It's really active. It's connective tissue. It's really trying to get, people to a place where, they feel, more and more inhabiting the truth of who they are. And so systems change when people change, and people change when they're cherished. And so and I see this here all the time, folks who come in here and they start here and they're belligerent and they're really difficult and they're in your face and you're trying to cherish them, and it's a challenge. But that in the end, it's so remarkable that kind of dosage that people get, it's so compelling that they always come back, even if they disappear for a while, even if they have a relapse of either violent behavior or drug involvement. They always come back because it's so compelling to have been cherished. But you watch it happen. You watch people are transformed because they were shown kindness. I believe in it fully, that we don't need to limit where the healing comes. I used to think, if healing is primary here, then people need to be doing therapy. And we have therapy, and we have anger management, and we have all these classes and groups. But because everybody embraces the spirit of cherishing and acknowledging and welcoming, that's what's compelling. All the other stuff is good and necessary. But because it's a constant, everybody is applying a dose to each other. And it's a bombardment of cherishing love that really wins the day. Even if you see, kind of bumps in the road where people are having difficulty, in the end, it's what, conquers the hate. I mean, nobody healthy is hates. And so gang members come in here and they're filled with hate for their parents, or hate for their baby mamas, or hate for rival enemy gang members. And it all dissolves once you're in a community that drives you sane. It all goes away eventually. And you can kind of take that to the bank, really.
So I can imagine, I listen to this and I can imagine others listen to this and think, well, that sounds amazing. How do we create communities that drive us sane? Well,
I think part of it is trying to fashion some place, even groups. I mean, we're so isolated and insular, and we really live solitary lives, and people have written books about all of this, and we're kind of bowling alone, but you gravitate to anything from a book club to a church to a school to a classroom to a community like we have here, which is the primary focus here. We'll help people get their driver's licenses and their social security card and their legal matters cleared up. And the list is long of concrete things that people need to address. But because we're here together, then we're surrounding each other. I was sharing this morning in our morning meeting about yesterday we had an earthquake in San Diego, and I could feel it in Los Angeles. And they had this clip at the San Diego Zoo where the elephants, the adult elephants, gathered when the earthquake hit. They gathered all the youngins, and they put them all in the middle, and they formed this circle around them. And it was called an alert circle, is what the zookeepers called it. And they move into this formation where they're surrounded by a calm and soothing presence. And you can see the younger elephants in the middle of the circle become, palpably calmer because they're surrounded. And then when the danger seems to have disappeared, then the circle opens again, and they resume whatever the elephants do. But I thought that's what we do here. We surround each other, and you choose. It's kind of our intentionality is to soothe people. So again, anyone who walks through our doors here comes barricaded behind a wall of shame and disgrace, and the only thing that can scale it is tenderness. And so, in as much as they come with a disorganized attachment, where mom was frightened or frightening, and truly you can't calm yourself down if you've never been soothed. You have to be retaught that, or taught it for you have to learn it for the first time even. And so it's kind of how we surround each other here. So to the extent that you can create, intentional communities where you can be surrounded and you can engage in that activity of surrounding the others, I think there are a million ways to do it.
Listening to you speak about the elephants, I was thinking that surrounding is soothing for the babies, but I would imagine soothing for the grown-ups too. There's something about soothing somebody else that is soothing for the soother.
Absolutely. I think that's a key insight, because that's part of the engagement, because where is the joy? Jesus talks about my joy, yours, your joy complete. And the joy is in being able to surround people and to be a source of delighting and safety and protection. And the joy is in being seen, but also be the person who sees. And that's a key thing. In St. Ignatius of Loyola has a meditation where he says, see Jesus standing in the lowly place. And it's not Jesus indicting. He's not pointing. He's not saying, get your ass over to the lowly place. It just says, see him standing in the lowly place. And it's evocative because it makes you think, why is he standing there? What's he look like? Is he peaceful? There's something about him being in the lowly place, choosing that in all humility, that is life-giving for him. And so, though he's not beckoning you, all you are seeing is him there. And then pretty soon you kind of have this, I'll have what he's having. I want to go over to that place because I think it's where the joy is. Which is the important part about being a soothing presence in the world, exactly as you say, is that you are soothed, that it's exactly the thing that pulls you out of your own self-absorption, that keeps you, always reminded that loving is your home. And then you go, wow, I am not homesick at this moment. I'm not missing anything. There's nothing missing here, which is a kind of a key insight as you kind of move out of your own self-absorption into the concern of somebody else who's perhaps distraught or in anguish.
Yeah, I've just seen that play out in my own life. One of my little jokes is that, and it's not really a joke, is that if you're doing self-improvement or personal development, whatever you want to call spiritual growth, if you're doing it correctly, you should feel like you've been an idiot your whole life until 6 weeks ago, always. And so in that spirit, I'll say that for most of my life, I think I've lapsed too frequently into selfishness. And the more in my later years that I've learned occasionally to be the soother, the happier I've become, which is counterintuitive because you would think the route to happiness is accumulation, achievement, acquisition, et cetera, et cetera. In fact, while some of that is necessary, it seems in my experience to be about like to be a little grandiose about it, being a beacon, being a source of comfort and safety, when you have the resources to do it.
Yeah. And, you said, use the word selfish. And I try to stay allergic to, because like selfish is kind of an indictment, as opposed to self-absorption, which is kind of just a human. If you're attentive to how you are being self-absorbed, then you're also attentive to how you are sad, how you're stuck. And so there's for me, I mean, I'm not a big sin person because I don't think it helps as a notion. It keeps us from progress, just as evil does, and certainly just as hell does. None of it is helpful. It really keeps us from progress. So in the same way that selfish is a kind of it denotes you've done something bad, as opposed to you've slipped into some, a concern about yourself, which is natural, but the joy is on the other side of that. If you can move quickly from self-concern, like, will I have enough and what about me? And then instead you move to, is she, does she have what she needs? Is he receiving all that he needs at the moment? Then suddenly you're in the realm of joy. That's where the joy is. But we don't know that, and we forget that, which is the key to our own practice, is to remind ourselves with every breath we take that that's where the joy is. And would that insight was once and for all, because, it would sure be nice if you could just decide that like a switch and turn it on and it never goes off, but it's a constant.
Yeah, you can set it as a North Star, and it helps to have practices, as you said. So let's talk about that. One of the, I believe, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the practices that you recommend in your new book is, I think this is either a Spanish or a Portuguese word, acatamiento, which translates as affectionate awe. Can you unpack that and also talk about how we can practice it as a way to get some of what Jesus has in the lowly place?
Yeah, but it's a word that St. Ignatius uses, and acatamiento in Spanish. And it comes from the word acatar, which means to look at something with attention. And again, it gets, as you say, is translated as affectionate awe. And though it was born, no doubt, as a result of some mystical singular moment between Ignatius and his God, I would like to think that Ignatius hoped it would be a disposition, a stance at the margin. So if the idea is to go to the margins and stand there, that's the only way that they actually get erased, is if we stand out at them. And not to rescue or save or fix the folks on the margins, but to go there so that the folks on the margins change me, alter my heart. And that's when things become exquisitely mutual between anyone going to the margins and anyone at the margins. But it's a disposition, it's a stance, it's how ought we to stand at the margins. Not as saviors, not as people who will transform lives, but with affectionate awe, that where you can receive people and allow your heart to be altered and to be reached by people. Because just that stance alone, is able to remind people of the truth of who they are. And so everybody entering in a mutual way into that sense of truth and and well-being, and inhabiting, the core of their own being, the ground of their being. So, yeah, it's a practice, and it's an intentionality, and it's, how can we stand in awe at what the poor have to carry rather than in judgment at how they carry it. And so, but that's not just for the poor and the folks at the margins. It's learning a practice that can lean in and be curious about what's going on rather than exacting and wrathful and judgmental, and all the ways that we had images of God that really have never been helpful. So it's a way of being in the world that can receive people. We're always going to be judging, but we can move from it being a moral judgment to kind of a health assessment where there's no kind of sense of this is a good person or a bad person, but a sense of, yes, this person's in pain. This person is broken. This person is wounded. And so in the process, you are welcoming your own wound. Otherwise, you will be tempted to despise the wounded. And despising the wounded is kind of where we are in our country at the moment, because that's the greatest symptom and indicator that mental health is the defining health issue of our time, is that we despise the wounded. And the immigrant, the gang member, the drug addict, the homeless person. The list is long and the reason we can be tempted to despise the wounded is because we haven't welcomed our own woundedness, which it requires humility and vulnerability and an acknowledgement of, the pain that we all have to carry and the anguish that we struggle with.
This does not sound like a simple, I mean, on one level it is simple, but it's not easy, this practice. So how can we put it to work in our own lives and make sure that we're consistent with it?
Things cannot be easy, but they can also be clear. There's a kind of a clarity to it, and I'm kind of a stickler on the thing about everybody's good. So once you get that out of the way, then you never have to judge whether somebody is good or bad. You can say, well, people are relatively healthy or not so healthy, or, if you can say, today I wasn't that healthy because I was short with people and I didn't listen and I wasn't anchored in a desire and a longing to listen and to love. And that's not about sin. That's just, self-absorption won the day, but it doesn't have to. And none of us are well until all of us are well. So how do we inch our way to that place? But in the end, what are we to do except to put one loving foot in front of the next? I don't know what else to do. Otherwise, you get caught up in sort of global concerns that, they just keep you from action rather than spur you on. And so, again, it's like Mother Teresa says, it's not doing great things, but small things with great love. And then it becomes doable. Then you're kind of just in the moment. And what's the next tender, loving thing I can do?
That in particular, that last thing you're saying seems very practical. Just to hold the question in your mind throughout the day and try to come back to it as a mantra. Or what's the next, this is a recovery phrase. What's the next right thing? What's the next loving thing? As a North Star, it seems pretty solid.
Yeah, I think it is, and the right thing, again, keeps us in the binary right and wrong part. But if it's the next loving thing, then you're not toppled by whatever behavior you're encountering. This is a silly example, but I was in Glasgow, Scotland with two homies, Caesar and George, and they'd never, been flown across the Atlantic and never had to need passports. But we were speaking at a conference and we were in a hotel, and every morning I said, well, I'll meet you at 8 and we'll walk to the conference and where we spoke. And so they were always on time. They were always waiting for me. They were sitting in the lobby in these big plush chairs. And as soon as they saw me, very loudly, they'd say, "Hello, governor." And I was mortified. And I was texting my staff at home. I was going, how do I get them to stop saying, "Hello, governor"? And they said it out in public, and they'd see an impressive architectural whatever, a building or a castle, and instead of saying "wow," they would kind of survey it and say, "Hello, governor." And it's funny how it bothered me. I was embarrassed and people were looking, and of course nobody speaks like this. And then I just made a decision. I remember I said, lean in, be curious about this. And in no time, I had moved from my own kind of weird embarrassment, mortification, where I knew what it was. We were speaking to a church at one point during our trip, and George, who is very even keel, is never excited about anything, he said very calmly to this audience, "I cannot contain my excitement in being here in Glasgow." Well, you could have fooled me. He didn't seem excited, but that's what it was. They were just positively out of body giddy to be there and for us to be there together. And then pretty soon I just wasn't bothered. It was my issue. It wasn't their issue. And because I had leaned in and I was curious about something that was bothering me in their behavior, I realized that I had entered into this whole other understanding, that I was comprehending something. And it seems silly, but it was really it was instructive to me, because comprehension, it means to get underneath it. What does it mean when somebody says that or does that? And pretty soon that just is so expansive. And then you're kind of, you have a whole, it's like you have a mystical lens where you can look at behavior and you go, what's that about? What pain is that representing? What wound is being excavated in this person's, insistence on something that you're finding annoying? But then you move beyond it. And it's really, talk about old dog and new tricks, I really, this old dog learns something new. And it's sort of stayed with me, and I've tried to kind of utilize it, because I think it is there's something there, because then we're always judging. Our feet hit the floor out of our bed and we start judging immediately. But you can catch yourself, and as my friend Pema Chodron says, catch yourself being judgmental. And you do this agere contra, which is what Ignatius talks about. Go against your inclination to be mortified. Go against your temptation to judge. Go against this idea that you're going to disparage somebody because of some behavior, and then get underneath it, comprehend. We talk a lot about compassion and empathy, but then there's this whole other comprehension piece where you understand, I see where this is coming from, and that's liberating.
I think there's a French expression, to know all is to forgive all, or something like that. and so it feels very related. Uh, Understanding the causes and conditions that lead up to somebody's current behavior, that is a form of love. And I believe Thich Nhat Hanh talks about love being understanding, in at least looked at from one angle.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. But we settle for our judgments because they're comfortable.
Yeah.
And it's, it's clear, and we're right, and we're insistent. And I remember we had a council meeting, which is a bunch of homies, and we're talking about our trainees, and one guy was complaining about, one of the trainees, and he says, what his problem is? He thinks his shit don't stink. And another guy said, no, I think everything he smells stinks. So it was a difference between somebody who had done the work and excavated his own wounds and was familiar, to somebody who was, who was going to cut to the chase and say, here's the problem. All of you are naive. He just thinks his shit don't stink. And I go, yeah, I'm going to go with this other homie who knows his own wounds enough to recognize that this behavior is a language, and it's indicating something that probably needs our attention. Yeah, I like that better.
I'm with you. And it really does show how self-love, self-compassion does inexorably, or at least can inexorably, lead to loving and being more compassionate toward other people. Because, I mean, it can help you get to this new paradigm that you're suggesting, which is, instead of judging, once you start seeing it through the health assessment, like what is going on for that person.
Yeah.
Because you've done it for yourself.
I haven't figured this one out entirely, but I think it's that the health assessment is the opposite of the moral judgment, because it takes out all this stuff about us and them, or bad or good or villain or enemy. It insists there's no such thing as them, that really, truly, it's just us. And the only way to maintain that is to allow people to belong, and again, to really imagine a circle of compassion, and then imagine nobody standing outside that circle. That's our insistence. We won't let anybody stand outside that circle. But you do get to a point where you just say, except this guy, he needs to be outside the circle. But you have to catch yourself. You have to say, no, that this is a kind of a truth that if you insist on it, then you really will do the work, which requires your steady practice. But you're really going to do the work to say, I will do everything I can so that this person feels welcome inside this circle. I don't ever want to reject them or send them elsewhere. And so you dismantle the barriers that exclude, which is the primary job of loving, is so that things become more inclusive tomorrow than they were today.
Well, you brought me right where I was hoping to go here in our remaining time. The book, again, is called Cherished Belonging, The Healing Power of Love in Divided Times. And you talk about creating a community of cherished belonging as an antidote to the polarization and hate and division we're seeing in the world right now, and in particular in the United States. And I'm just curious, like, what's your level of optimism that things will improve, no less, that will actually create a writ large a community of cherished belonging?
Well, I always say hopeful rather than optimistic, but I'm hopeful. I'm completely hopeful, because I being here, which is very sustaining for me, it's the front porch of the house everybody wants to live in, and so that's okay to be that simultaneously with helping people concretely, jobs, training, money in their pocket, recovery. All those things are concrete and helpful. And at the same time, we're the front porch of the house everyone wants to live in. So you want to hold up some kind of, you don't want to hide your light under the bushel basket, put it out there where people can see it. And that's kind of important to me here, because it's like the great John Lewis used to say, we all live in the same house. And it was declarative. It wasn't aspirational. It was one day we might live in the same house. No, this is who we are. We all live in the same house. And it's not about some are in the basement and some are on the first floor. No, we all live in the same house. So the more you can kind of announce that with your lives, so people can see it and say, yeah, we need more of that. Or I need to find a way to do that in my own life, where we're, intentionally inclusive and dedicated to soothing each other in our anguish, because we don't really hold different views. We're just held by the same anguish. And so how do we intentionally, move closer to the home that we're all invited to of wholeness and well-being and health?
Did you ever see that movie, The Year of Living Dangerously? It came out in the 80s.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And there's a scene in there where he's talking to his co-star, whose name I've forgotten. And she says something to the effect of, he's bemoaning the state of the world and what do you do about it? And she says, you just add your light to the sum of light. And that seems to rhyme with what you're saying today. That's
so right and true. And I'm remembering that line. And otherwise you get overwhelmed and you think there's nothing you can do. And that will lead to a kind of despair. But we're hopeful, anchored in the ability of what I can do right at this moment. Not even today, but what can I do right in this moment as I am breathing? And that just puts it in its place, where it needs to be, which is me doing the next loving thing that I can do. And being attentive, because that spirit of acatamiento comes from the word acatar, which means to look at something with attention. And so in my language, I suppose I'd say you notice the notice of God, and then you become that notice in the world. A homie ended an email with me the other morning, and we email every day. I call him my spiritual director. But he ended his email by saying, today I will surrender into the arms of God, then choose to be those arms. And that's kind of the whole law and the prophets right there, because it's about receiving the tender glance and becoming the tender glance. It's about noticing the notice of God and then choosing to be that notice in the world where you are looking at things with attention. And it's the mystical lens. It's how to see the world, where you surrender to, however you want to say it, to the core of your being, to the ground of your essence, and then choosing to be that spirit in the world, all at the same time. It's exhilarating, I think.
It is. I can feel it in my body as you speak. I would just add one little potential tweak, which is, use the word mystical, but to me, it strikes me, and maybe this isn't a contradiction, but it strikes me as very practical. You can acknowledge the mystery, the fact that none of us knows shit, and also decide that the smartest way to live in this confusing situation is to be as useful as possible. And all of that lines up with what we know from modern psychological research. about how to be a healthy, whole person in the world.
Yeah, and we get tripped up by a word like mystical because it feels like it's not meant for me. But I recommend a book, Mirabai Starr, Ordinary Mysticism, and she talks about how to connect this mystical view to ordinary living and how it is to be recognized in that. So it's not some otherworldly sense, but it's only in this world and in the present moment. So
I may have asked you this question before, and you mentioned your long-running friendship with Pema Chodron, which I believe we talked about the last time you were on the show. But I'm curious, like for you personally, your life at Homeboy Industries is a practice, but do you have some sort of personal meditation or centering prayer or some sort of practice that allows you to stay anchored in a very demanding environment?
Yeah, I mean, I get up really early, like 2:45 in the morning. It's ridiculous, but I spend a lot of time in that practice, along with, having something to eat and checking emails, which is when I kind of do, and then I check in with my spiritual director every morning. So yeah, that's my practice. I mean, I have my little chair and my little altar and my little space. And then I try to do other ways to kind of reconnect my own breathing to the present moment, to if there's a lull in the action, which is rare around here. But when there is, if I'm walking to my car, I try to, find the peace in every step that I take. And I always call it, breathing in the spirit that delights in my being, and then breathing it out into the world. So it's always, it's like breathing, inhaling and exhaling. It's not meant to stay singular and with you. It's meant to always be exhaled out into the world. With every loving step you take, how do you do that? But that's my practice, is a kind of early morning thing. But I'm beyond the idea that there's a once and for all to your morning practice. God knows, because as soon as I'm all set to go and I'm walking into the office, and suddenly you're bombarded with 93 unrealistic demands placed on your time, and you can lose it. So you want to be able to carry that through the whole day. It's a challenge. Cherishing is not hard, but remembering to cherish is exceedingly difficult. And so that's what you always want to remind yourself to remember.
Yes, you probably know this, and this is one of my common riffs, and what we can close on this is that the word mindfulness, the original translation of that word in the ancient language of Pali, the word is sati, S-A-T-I, in the Pali language. And we translate it as mindfulness, but the original translation was recollecting, remembering.
Yeah.
And that's the practice.
Yeah, that's excellent. That's helpful.
You are excellent and helpful, Father Gregory Boyle. Final thing I'll ask of you before we let you go. Can you just remind everybody of the name of your new-ish book, and then anything else you've put out into the world that we should know about?
Well, it's called Cherished Belonging, and you probably have the subtitle right there.
I do. I do. I'll say it. It's The Healing Power of Love in Divided Times.
There you go. I knew it was something like that. I don't know. I love talking to you and with you.
Likewise.
And listening to you, and I'm a big fan. So thanks for the invitation. That
feeling is heartily mutual.
Thanks.
I really look up to you, and I just also want to recommend one of your previous books, which is Tattoos on the Heart, which was recommended to me by my meditation teacher, Joseph Goldstein, and everybody should look at and consider supporting the work of Homeboy Industries. Father Boyle, thank you again. And if it's okay with you, maybe the next time I'm in LA, I'll send you an email, because I'd love to meet you in person.
Oh, please come by and get the Cook's tour. of Homeboy.
Okay.